Good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. If I have not had a chance to meet you personally, I am Heath Morrison, very proud superintendent, Montgomery ISD, and we'd like to welcome you to our town hall where we're going to discuss a proposed bond. And we are very, very pleased to be here at Montgomery High School. I want to thank Dr. Schur and the administration for making the auditorium available. As you saw, we have a show getting ready to go here, so I also want to thank our theater crew and students for getting their rehearsal for Shrek, and then accommodating our ability to have a town hall here. And hopefully you got a chance to hear a little bit of the awesome performers and see a little bit of the set. And we'll think a great way to spend your weekend is coming to support our theater students here at Montgomery High School. As I said, I am Heath Morrison, Superintendent, Montgomery ISD. I'm officially entered my second year as superintendent, and one of my core values as a superintendent is that we have the honor and privilege of serving our students in this district in a public education system. And a public education system is always better if it reaches out to engage our public. And that is one of my core values. It's also one of the core values of our Board of Trustees. And I want to acknowledge our Board of Trustees, and we have two board members here tonight that I see. One, Linda Porton, our Board Secretary, and also Miss Lori Turner. So guys, wave so we can thank them for being here. I also want to acknowledge that we have folks who have taken your time to attend this meeting in person. We also have a live stream where we have a number of people who are availing themselves of technology, and much like our classes, sometimes we're having to do both in person and online, and we want to accommodate everyone, because ultimately what we want to do is to have people understand why our board first formed a bond task force, and why these members of the bond task force, who are represented by parents, students, employees, business leaders, faith-based leaders, folks who have students in our school district, folks who had students in our school district, and folks who never have but care deeply about this community in our school district, have taken months to look at different data, different information, ask an amazing amount of questions, and ultimately have come forward and presented to our board at their last board meeting a recommendation for a potential bond to be considered for this upcoming May. So my idea of a great meeting is for us to be able to present information, which our bond task force will do. And I want to publicly acknowledge, while we had over 60 members of that bond task force, they are not all here tonight, but we do have members of our bond task force who will present their recommendations to you, as they did to our Board of Education recently. And then the opportunity is for you to ask questions, you to provide input, for us to listen to you, because that is incredibly important. We've tried to demonstrate that with calendars, with budgets, with the creation of our strategic plan. All of that has been done with public input. And every time we reach out to the public, ultimately the decisions we make are always better because we listened and we learned. With that, I'd like to bring up my friend and colleague, our Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Operations, Mr. Chris Lynn.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Morrison. As he said, it is our privilege this evening to have members of our bond task force share with you their recommendation that they made to our Board of Trustees at the board meeting last week. This has been a long and thorough process. Our Board of Trustees started looking at growth and facilities assessments way back at the end of 2020 and early of 2021. So this is not something that has just happened overnight. And as the committee will present tonight, they will walk you through all of the information that they learned and went through throughout this process. So I don't want to steal any of their thunder. I just want to say and echo Dr. Morrison's comments, what a privilege it has been to be a part of this process. And thank the members of the task force for all of their efforts, for volunteering their time, their thoughtful participation, and as he said, making recommendations even better than where we started. So Without further ado, we're going to get started this evening with one of our student members of the task force, Ms. Kyler Smith. So Kyler, come on up, please.
Good evening. My name is Kyler Smith, and I'm a junior at Lake Creek High School. Tonight, we will be giving you an overview of the task force, key information items, our recommendations, and our next steps. The task force was made up of people from all over the community, including parents, MISD staff, business owners, community members without kids or grandkids in the district, and 2 students from each of the MISD high schools. It was important to have the entire community represented so we could do our best in making decisions that would impact everybody from different perspectives. As a task force, our goals were to consider the educational needs of all students, to make sure our recommendation was fiscally sound, and to present our proposal to the school board. We met as a group 6 times over the course of 3 months, and we were able to tour each of these campuses and see both the good and the bad within our district facilities.
Good evening. Chris?
Let's try this again.
Good evening. As a task force, we studied district information, including demographics projects, financial status, building conditions, opportunities for students, and more. We encourage anyone who would like to see the data, the full data. It is on the district website. You can see the 6 meetings that we held, all the minutes from the meetings, and it's under the heading of Paving Our Path, Bond 2022. It is not difficult to notice that Montgomery is growing. Simply drive around the community. You will see many, many housing developments popping up everywhere. Given this, MISD hired a company called Population and Survey Analysts, PASA, to conduct a demographic study to see how the growth would impact our schools. Based on PASA's results, the district knew it was likely that 3 out of our 6 elementary schools and Lake Creek High School would be over capacity by 2025. These charts show the enrollment projections for each campus as of January of 2021. The orange highlights signify when the campus exceeds capacity. In 2018, Lake Creek opened with 900 students. Today, we are already over capacity. Keenan Elementary School opened in 2017. In October, they had 784 students, and as of January 10th, they were at 865 students. The same can be said for most of our schools. However, growth appears to be occurring much faster than the projections in the study. Dr. Morrison shared with us that over the last few months, he met with all of the major builders in the area and learned that several of the projects in the study are moving at an accelerated rate. There's even more houses being added to them. Additionally, he learned of several other projects not included in the study and they are receiving final approval very soon. This will result in even further enrollment in MISD. In addition to understanding how growth would impact our schools, MISD wanted to know the current condition of each facility and how we can prepare for the future. We have many, many wonderful campuses and facilities. However, they are showing their age, and many improvements are necessary. The assessment addressed each campus and facility in the district. Here, you can see an example of just one page of Montgomery High School. The full report can be found on the district website under Transparency. During our meetings, we had the opportunity to tour some of the campuses, and we were able to see for ourselves what needs to be done at a lot of our campuses. Thank you.
Let's hope I don't knock it all down. Good evening. My name is Shannon Reed. I'm the Executive Director of Montgomery Area Chamber, and I was privileged to serve on the task force as well. So I want to dive in a little bit with you to talk about the finance portion and really understanding how that all came together, because in the end we have to pay for it. So one of the charges that we had, as Kyler mentioned at the very beginning, was to consider any implication that had to be fiscally sound that we brought in recommendation to the board. And in addition to that, we wanted to understand as a task force how schools are funded. You know, that's easy to look at from a distance, but we really wanted to dive in and understand that so that we could make good decisions. So, see if this works. Here we go. This chart really does break down how a total project comes together. So we start by looking at the construction costs, but there are a lot of different costs that are associated in addition to those initial construction costs. We had to consider the escalation over time, not just at today's cost, but what that would look like in the future to create a future total cost. And to that, we had to consider a lot of other financial burdens, including our soft costs like building permits and surveys, the cost of furniture or technology once you have a building constructed and you have to fill it, land purchases for various school buildings that needed to come along in the future. And coupled with all of that, we wanted to make sure we had contingencies worked into any project. As you know, when you're working on something, nothing is exactly as you originally budgeted, so we wanted to make sure we had a well-rounded number that we could present and be confident with. So at the end of all of those pieces, we came up with a total project budget. So then we wanted to take a look at funding and how our school district is financed. So this diagram, I think, helps to put this in our minds very well. If you think about it in terms of these buckets, Our school is financed in two different areas. Our M&O stands for Maintenance and Operation, and that's what we typically call the general fund. And the other portion is our interest in sinking, and typically we refer to that as debt service. So when we talk about our M&O, or general fund, let's think about it as if you were building a house or have your own financial obligations. So on the one hand, M&O is funding our day-to-day maintenance and operations. So our salaries for our teachers and staff, our bus repairs and maintenance, our fuel, school supplies, materials, utilities like our electricity and water. So those recurring regular expenses. For you, an average homeowner, it might look like regular house repairs or car fuel, routine maintenance, groceries, things like that. So those are all coming from the general fund. Then the interest in sinking, or that debt service bucket that I mentioned, for our schools, those are the big ticket items. So think of new buildings, land purchases, any large program-specific equipment that's required, technology, school buses. So in our own personal lives, that might look like it's time to buy a new house or a new car, or do a large project for a restoration or renovation that you're doing. Those kinds of things, one-ticket items, are what you might take a personal loan for in that case. And that's what we are separating in our school finance budget. So let's look at our local tax efforts here. The M&O is what you would normally hear our school board talk about when they are balancing their budget or presenting their general fund. So this M&O budget that bucket is what they are working on. And it is very important to note that about 80% of that budget that they are working on is dedicated to personnel, salaries, and all of the related costs that go with that. So those large ticket items really wouldn't have room to fall in that M&O budget anyway. And then you'll see the INS funds are only used to repay debts that have been occurred through previous bonds. They are not ever applied to salaries. I know that there's lots of question and talk about teacher pay, but our teachers are not paid from the INS bucket at all. So let's take a look at our current tax rate as of the end of 2021. Right now, our M&O sits at 0.8857, our INS tax rate at 0.3743, making our total combined tax rate at $1.26 per $100 valuation on your home in property tax. And I really like this chart because it shows the past 17 years. You can see the decline in our tax rate over the years. And that significant to note, that red box that says HB3 in 2019, when our state legislature worked on property reform and school tax reform, that is further compressing and alleviating some of the tax burden to our taxpayers.
My name is, can you all hear me? My name is Klein Piachowski. I'm a junior over at Lake Creek High School. I'm really honored to have gotten the opportunity to voice a student's input into this bond recommendation. And one big part of the bond that you'll notice is the CTE program. That stands for Career and Technical Education. Lots of information on there, but so we studied the district's strategic plan and how the different projects that we're including in the bond will align with the goals for the future of MISD. So we want every student that graduates from MISD to walk across the stage, either going to college or going into the workforce. And right now, about 36%, I think it was on the last slide actually, no, maybe on this one, 36% of the students that graduate from Montgomery ISD go into the workforce. And as the school district, we have the unique opportunity to equip and provide opportunities for those students for certifications, for high quality jobs. That way, after they're done with high school, if they don't want to go to college, they can go into a well-paying job with the certifications they need to do well. These programs also do help students who are going to college by providing on-hand experience, and it kind of lets them taste test to see what they like, what classes they do like, what classes they don't. That way they can make well-informed decisions. And so it benefits really all of our students here at MISD. Oh, I skipped to your slide, didn't I?
I'm so proud of Klein and Kyler's participation in getting the students' perspective, especially where CTE is concerned. I think that's really commendable, and we appreciate your input. But one of the things that I want to just drive home to you today is really our ultimate findings after all of these months that we worked together, reviewing all of the information, tackling all of the data that was thrown at us, both from a growth perspective and what our facilities were experiencing and where we needed to get, as well as our strategic plan and all of the things that we've been working on for the last several years with under this leadership in our administration as well as the school board. We really boiled it down to these three drivers that helped us pinpoint the main needs as well as recommending our solution and what we thought would be the best opportunity for Montgomery ISD. So I just want to drive home these three main key points. Growth, absolutely. It is inevitable. It's coming our way. You can see it everywhere, as Marianne suggested. Facility upgrades, you can see that when you're visiting the campuses. You can see that in the slides and the images that we were exposed to at every one of our meetings to see real-world challenges that our campuses are dealing with and to try to continue to educate in those environments. And then finally, as Klein pointed out, our 36% of students that need to be better served, I wouldn't suggest that they're underserved, but I think that they could be better served with a career and technology education center. And so we really focused in on those three drivers as we put our recommendation forward. And in total, our task force went to the school board at their last meeting to recommend a total package of $326 million to cover those three things and all of the details. So in that recommendation, you'll be hearing that breakdown this evening.
All right, and I get to start that breakdown. So the first bullet point that was put up was growth. Growth is consensus. The first thing we did as a task force at our second meeting was to find what consensus was to us. This, we decided, would be 66% or 2/3 vote. And so for each project that we did, we voted on whether we would support it as a committee. And so by doing this, we all agree with this recommendation. We all stand by this, and we all agree that this is the best way to move forward as the school district. So now to the growth projects. The first two things you'll see are elementary number 7 and the expansion of Lake Creek High School. Elementary number 7, as we pointed out earlier, Keenan is already almost 100 students over capacity. So something has to be done at this point, whether it's starting construction on elementary number 7 or having portable buildings. And for the expansion of Lake Creek High School, in the 2015 bond, that's when we had the money for the first phase of Lake Creek High School, but it was always planned to have a second phase. And so through this bond with the $28 million, we're hoping to start the second phase of construction there, which will expand its capacity because right now Lake Creek, which is the high school I attend, is already at 200 students over capacity. The bottom two things you'll see are the $15 million for land purchasing. We recognize as a committee that land prices are only going to go up. And so right now we need to purchase land before it gets higher. We included that in this bond package just so we can make the best financial decisions possible. And that way down the road, we're not caught in an even higher price tag. We're also hoping to begin pre-construction and our architect planning of junior high number 3. As we're seeing those numbers rise in the student population, we need to get ready to accommodate that growth. The other 2 projects that we designed to alleviate the growth that MISD is facing is new buses. So right now, Montgomery ISD has 35 buses that we are currently using that are beyond their useful life. So we need to replace those buses. We need to acquire new buses for the growing student population and to get ready for the future of whatever growth and changes come next. Technology devices we also included in this package for all the way from pre-K through 12th grade. This is really important because other high schools across the nation have one-to-one technology, and MISC is lacking in that. And through having technology for every student, it will really equip everyone. Because right now the computers that we're using are years behind in the industry standard. So this is some really exciting recommendations that are included in this package. And now I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Jim.
It works. My name is Jim Hostetler. I'm delighted to have been invited to participate in this task force. It was a very enlightening as well as educational experience for me after 42 years in the private sector. Public sector is a little bit different, and we found that out in the composition of our task force. We had a lot of different perspectives. We didn't always agree on everything. We're going to talk a little bit about to the degree to which we did reach consensus, as Klein pointed out, was a level of 66% was our bottom line. Now, if this will stay up here. I turned back 2 slides on purpose. The discussions we had revolved around 17 different project groupings. There are a lot of things that go under each of these projects, but there are 17 different ones. The first one, as Klein mentioned, is the elementary school. And as Shannon mentioned, the growth is upon us. It's coming faster than most people anticipated. I know even since the demographic study was done last year, we've had 2 new developments up on 1097 alone, which are going to bring in several hundred more students over many years. The consensus that was reached on the new elementary school was 89%. It means there was a lot of support for the needs there. The next one, well, let me also comment that the reason this is important at this time is it takes almost 2 years to build a new school. That's from scratch. That says you have to acquire the money, and you have to acquire the land. Then you start developing some plans around that, the approvals you go through before you can start construction. And so it takes quite a while, and there's quite a lead time to get ready for a new school. That'll come back a little bit later. Constructing the enhancement and the addition to Lake Creek has been mentioned. That was pretty obvious. Again, 96% was the consensus on that one. And on land purchase, I mentioned that one separately as a project because we've been told some stories about some property that was available a couple years ago at $55,000 an acre. Now they're asking $100,000 an acre for the same stuff. Land obviously is not going to get cheaper. The consensus on purchasing amount of land now was 100%. And this is not just one piece of property, but in some places like Lake Creek, we're sort of land bound at this point. There's not much more room to build there except for the phase 2 that is in the offing here. The fourth item is the design and pre-construction. That's the one where there was a whole lot of money for a junior high school that we might not need for several years, but we decided that as a group it would make a lot of sense to put some money aside for acquiring the property and also getting some planning and preparation in place so that when the decision was made that we had to build this school, it wouldn't take the whole 2 years to get it done. We'd have a running start. So that had a 70% consensus. The new buses, as Klein mentioned, we've got we got $6.3 million in here. We've got 35 buses that are needing replaced soon. If a bus costs $150,000, which we learned, you can see that money is going to be used up fairly quickly in the next 2 or 3 years. The buses got 100% consensus, and the students were leading the race on that. Technology devices, I can tell you, after 42 years in the IT business, I was appalled at the level of technology that our students are learning on today. Basically, the technology they're using in the computer labs in this school in particular are, those things had been abandoned 5 years ago by industry. I mean, by the time the kids graduate from here, they're going to be 5 to 7 years behind where their potential employers might like them to be on levels of technology, unless they're using iPhones, I guess. The consensus on technology devices was 86%. The next item was one that was one of my hot buttons. It's been mentioned that the facility upgrade, facility maintenance line item is out there on the website. And that study, the executive summary of which is 216 pages long. And there's over 1,000 pages of detail backing that up. But the bottom line on that study that was completed last May is that we're $63 million behind in maintenance on the 17 facilities across the entirety of MISD. That's a scary thought, because even though you can't spend all that money at once, I mean, 2 or 3 years down the road, that money's going to be exhausted. It had some money added to this number for the study number for inflation and cost of materials, as most people know is rapidly advancing. But the facility upgrades are very, very important. And it had a 97% level of consensus among the crowd. The infrastructure to enhance the classroom technology. Now, this is not just the PCs that are used in the labs and in the classrooms, but it's the rest of the equipment that has to enable those PCs, like the servers, the routers around the campuses, the computer rooms to hold the servers, frames, racks, all that sort of stuff. That all adds up, and that doesn't get any cheaper. The technology drives more functionality in this equipment, but it doesn't drive the price down. That also received a 100% consensus among the task force. Safety and security was another important area. There are definitely some needs for upgrading the security cameras, the intrusion detection, fencing, a number of other security technology devices that are well behind where they should be. We hear every day about problems in campuses around the country, around the world for that matter, but we can't let that happen here. The consensus was 100% on that point. Lastly, two facilities we have for transportation definitely need a number of renovations and upgrades, some expansions. Mentioned here is a fueling station that I'm sure you've seen filling stations around the area. They have to shut the place down for a while they redo the tanks and do all the environmental kinds of things necessary. So that's not cheap, but that also got a 100% consensus. There's a line called Comparability Improvements, and this was a new term for me. It might be for you. But the purpose is to ensure that all the schools have similar functionality, both physically and as well as the curriculum, so that no one school stands out as being better or worse than any other school. So there's no issue about which school your student might attend, because they will all be comparable. And this ranges everything from physical aspects to fine arts, like the artwork, or the colors, or the decoration. I mean, in terms of playgrounds, some of the areas need some shade devices. I mean, there's lots of things to make these schools comparable, and that comparability thing received a 92% consensus. The athletic complex was another area that got a lot of discussion. Mostly what this refers to is the stadium, football field, and the seating and parking and the food service and everything that goes with that. I believe the date I recall was that the field was, and the stadium was built back in 1996. Different time, different number of students, a lot fewer activities, and it needs some help. Now, this is not a $70 million project like some schools are coming up with. This is basically some updates and some renovations that are very necessary. I laughed when I saw the word press box. This is really not about the press. This is really about a facility where coaches come from other schools to either scout the team, or in some cases to scout some of the Montgomery School District players for potential scholarships and things that they might actually be offering. It's upgrades to the technology so they can stream the games, so they can stream the players and the things that they're doing. And oh, by the way, yeah, they do have some room for the press. It also expands the seating capacity of the stadium, some addition to parking, and keep the people out of the Methodist church parking lot. I was also amused at the story the athletic director told us about the visitors' locker room is so small that the visitors can dress in the locker room, but in order to get their ankles taped or anything else they need done, they have to go outside to get that done. There's some expansions that would be appropriate there as well. The athletic complex renovations had a 66%. It met right at the level of consensus of the task force. The Montgomery High School athletic renovations it includes resurfacing and extending the life of the tennis courts and adding upgrades to the lighting to the auxiliary stadium. And this was another area that the athletic director felt very strong about, and that got a 79% consensus. Covering the batting cages at Lake Creek, this is something that should have been done when the batting cages were built. Most of the other schools in the area have covered batting cages, but not Lake Creek. It was another area that people felt was appropriate, and it got a 79% consensus. And lastly was installing the turf for the baseball and softball fields. This expenditure will eventually be offset by elimination of a lot of maintenance expense and trying to keep those fields playable, and also make them usable immediately after a rainstorm. So there's a number of athletic items in here, and I'll come back to those in a minute on how they get grouped further. Now, the third main driver has been mentioned is CTE, Career and Technical Education. The centralized CTE site was had a consensus of 86%, and this had a lot of discussion with it. But the idea is to expand the CTE offerings well beyond the automotive and cosmetology, but into some aerospace, into more IT technology, labs, facilities where people, students can actually get hands-on, everything from welding to plumbing to electrical work to things that will actually result in them being able to qualify for certifications and actually get real jobs when they do graduate if they choose not to go on to college. I know my son took advantage of some of that, and when he went on to Georgia Tech in aerospace, he was several steps ahead of his peers because he had a great deal of this type of training while he was still in high school. The consensus on the Centralized CTE Center was 86%. And it was determined that one center would probably be a better solution than try to squeeze two centers in because, first of all, we didn't have the space at Lake Creek or Montgomery High School. So it's going to be a third location. And yes, there will be some challenges with transportation, but hundreds of other schools have solved these problems. I'm quite confident we'll be able to figure it out as well. The last item is the Centralized Ag Science Center. I don't think of this as the ag barn. We have an ag barn. It's adequate for its needs today, but it doesn't take students beyond a place to exercise and feed their animals and so forth. An Ag Science Center done well will have all new spaces for storage, for animal handling of animals, for training, for a vet tech program and classes. It'll have a show arena that will be one of the best in the area. This particular item, though, did not reach, I'm sorry, let me back up. This particular item had 100% consensus on the fact that we had to do something in ag science, that it was an essential element of our CTE program. What it did not reach consensus on was whether we did one or two facilities. The two facilities would have to be smaller and not as complete as one world-class facility. And so we put the money in there for the better facility, location yet to be determined, by talking about putting a separate Ag Science Center by each high school was a non-starter because we don't have the physical space. We don't have the land to do that, to build a comparable center close to each high school. So irregardless, there's going to be one site. It'll be shared by both schools. The board still has to make a decision if that's the way they want to go. And that was the one item that the task force turned over to the board for their decisions. Okay, I thank you for your time. Oh. Let me just recap real quick before Chris comes up. Proposition A, B, and C are three different propositions that will likely show up on the bond election coming up in May. We separated into three, not because of any level of interest or support or anything for the three, but the athletic complex and the technology device line items by state statute, must be separate from all the rest of the enhancements that we want to make and the growth supporting facilities. So there will likely be 3 different propositions, and we hope that people will vote for all 3. I've given you all the details. I also tell you that all the details are on the website if you want to go back and check my scores. Thank you very much.
Here in just a second, we're going to ask the members of the audience here in person and those of us who are joining us online for any questions that you may have. But before we get to that, there's a couple things that I do want to cover. Once again, just my sincere appreciation and gratitude to this entire community, committee, and the community, for all of their efforts over the course of the last few months, especially these individuals joining us tonight, presenting in front of this group. Just thank you so much. I know it can be nerve-wracking, and we sincerely appreciate all of your efforts. So one of the main questions before we get to open questions is, how are we going to pay for this, and how much is the tax impact? And so the average home value in Montgomery ISD is $350,000. And so a $326.9 million bond would need to increase the tax rate by 0.007 of a cent. That equates to an increase of $22.29 per year on the average home value of $350,000. Once again, $22.29 a year for the average home in Montgomery ISD. With that, Dr. Morrison, Justin, I believe we're ready to open it up for questions. So please, if you have one, raise your hand. We'll get a mic to you, and we will answer any questions that you might have. If you have one, please raise your hand. Justin's got a mic back there in the back.
Well, while you're thinking of questions, we did get one that just came through from one of our YouTube viewers. And that is, are all district needs going to be included in this bond?
First of all, again, I want to extend our appreciation for the Bond Task Force Committee. Many, many hours, lots and lots of data. And I will also say that as staff, we're constantly looking at data, we're constantly looking at information and trying to bring thoughtful, fiscally responsible decisions that we think will positively impact learning and teaching in our district to our board for their consideration. And so as we do that, we try to bring our best thinking to the table, as have they. What I will say, what was really interesting is over the summers, we were looking at the same data, and over the fall, looking at the same data as they were looking at, and we were kind of coming up with, well, what do we think should be in a proposed bond package? There's only 2 recommendations that we said should definitively be in there, and they are exactly the same way in this proposal as we as staff were thinking about that, and that is Elementary 7 and the addition to Lake Creek. Every other idea that we had or thought or suggestion was changed, modified, altered, or added by this task force, and I will say, I think, made better. And so again, we really appreciate their input. The district has a number of different needs, the same as any district will, especially a district like ours, which is growing as quickly as it is growing. So when we're asked the question, does this cover all the multitude of needs that we would love to have? The answer to that would be no. But is it fiscally responsible, and do we think it's going to address the immediate needs over the next 5 years to 10 years? We think that it will address the vast majority of them. The challenge that we will always have is growth is a little bit like the challenge that Mr. Lynn and I, our Director of Maintenance, Joe Kennard, our security folks have to make when we have the threat of inclement weather. And so at 3:30 in the morning, we're on the phone with our friends from emergency management, other school districts, other surrounding security folks, and we're constantly trying to assess at 3:30 what we think the weather is going to be doing at 5:30 when we have to make a call, delay schools, have no schools, or go ahead and open. And you take the best information you have at the time, you make the best decisions, and you keep your fingers crossed that you get it right. The growth is really challenging because we can all drive around, as Mary Ann Coleman said, and you see the growth every day. The demographers came and they suggested that on moderate growth, our school district by 2030 is going to be closing in on 14,000 students. We're already exceeding not only the growth in the moderate growth projections, but their high growth projections. And as Mary Ann also said, because the study was done in May, myself and Mr. Lynn decided, well, you know what, there's so many additional students enrolling. We've had almost 500 students since the start of school enroll in our schools. We met with the 14 major developers, and we showed them the demographic study, and we asked the question, is everything in this study still on cue? The answer in every single case was yes. Is it the same as in the study, or is it altered? In every single case, it was either exactly as presented, or more homes, or a higher number or density of multifamily homes, which would yield us more students. Or we also heard about projects that had not been included because the projects in the demographic study could only utilize those that had been approved. But as Mary Ann said, several projects around our district that were either getting ready to be approved, just approved, or have a high likelihood of being approved that are going to yield more students. So that's a long way of saying the thing that keeps me up at night is the potential of needing middle school 3 and potentially middle school 8, or elementary 8, because the demographic study suggested towards the end of 2030 we would probably need a 3rd middle school and potentially an 8th elementary school. And so the question is, well, if that was suggested, why would you not include it? The issue is in terms of, we think that we could reach the latter parts of the demographic study with the addition to Lake Creek High School and the addition of a 7th elementary school. But then to plan for the middle school, I really applauded the committee when they went ahead to make the suggestion for that, so that if we need that middle school sooner rather than later, we're not starting from scratch. So that is a long way of saying, no, it does not cover all of the needs that we have, but we think it covers the most important. We think it covers the ones that will allow us to continue to thrive as a school district, and we also think that it is fiscally responsible to our community, who is very gracious in their support of our school district.
Thanks for the time and the support from everybody. I had jotted down a few questions while we were going through here, and one of them is on this slide right here. About how many years does it take to raise that amount at that increased rate? Does that happen in year 1? I mean, how many years are we, just roughly, high level?
Sure. So when we are figuring out the estimated tax impact, there are a lot of assumptions that go into that based on our assumed property value growth or decline. Also, how we access that $326.9 million. So the tax rate is levied when the bonds are actually sold. And so these assumptions are based on selling bonds over a 4-year period. So think about $326.9 million in 4 distinct chunks. And so that tax rate is only impacted as that particular amount of bonds is sold, okay? So you would not see that full tax rate impact until all $326 million of bonds are sold. So it would be several years down the road before that maximum tax impact would be expected.
Can I ask a couple more? I got a couple more if no one wants to stop me. But on the elementary school potential, for number 7, any ideas where that would be?
At this point, you saw one of the items was land purchase. Okay, so that means the district currently does not have land to house Elementary 7, the Centralized Cte Center, and Ag Science Center, or perhaps middle school number 3. And so at this point, we are exploring our options, but the district currently does not own land, so I cannot give you a definitive answer as to where that school will be located. However, we do have some geographical areas that we're looking at based on enrollment and overcrowding at Keenan and Stewart Creek.
And I think that's the most important thing, is looking at the projects that we know are coming in, the volume coming in, and the speed that they're coming in. Keenan needs immediate relief today. Stewart Creek is going to, I was actually at Stewart Creek today. We have our principal here, and I'm just amazed every time I go, but there's a whole swath of homes that are coming up right beside Stewart Creek. And then if you're driving up 105, you actually don't notice it, but across the marina, there is Pine Lake Cove. And Pine Lake Cove is going to bring around 900 homes, 250 multifamily homes. Right now, those would all be zoned to go to Stewart Creek. So those are the 2 schools that are going to need the most immediate relief. But as the demographic study suggests, we're seeing growth all over the district. And so it's not even that rezoning, we could send them to a school that's not as impacted, because all of our schools are getting to that capacity where they're going to need some relief. But in answer to your question, it's going to have to be somewhere in proximity of Keenan and Stewart Creek.
2 more. The junior high, I saw that looks like maybe $6 million to kind of kick that off, which would be included in this bond. But where's the rest coming from?
Sure. So as the committee discussed the issue, and Dr. Morrison pointed out that the demographic study really shows that by the end or approaching 2030 is really when we see that need for that 3rd middle school. And so at this point, the task force, that growth is just so uncertain and so potentially far off, we didn't want to include it in this. In order to actually construct junior high number 3, it would require a future bond referendum. This referendum, once again, just to be clear, would provide the land for junior high number 3, and it would allow us to go ahead and design that campus for that piece of property, so that when that future bond, whenever that may be, is approved for junior high number 3, that work is already done, and we can start construction a little sooner.
Okay. I want to say that when we did the bond in 2015 for $350 million, I think we built Keenan for $26 million, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm seeing 43.5. That's a 67% increase. Is that really how much prices have increased for the last 5 years?
Trust me, we have spent a lot of time in our task force meetings talking about pricing, inflation, escalation, soft costs, and that's why Shannon spent as much time as she did talking about those factors. Unfortunately, yes, costs are significantly higher today than they were back in 2015. During 2015, Lake Creek High School was built for approximately $100 million, okay? Today, it would take roughly $100 million to build junior high number 3, okay? So yes, costs are significantly higher due to inflation, due to global supply chain demand, and everything else. And so these are not our numbers. These are numbers from our professional architects, Huckabee, and what they are seeing in the industry based on current bids that are taking place, current dollar per square foot costs that are coming in. So yes, these are accurate costs plus some inflation factors and some contingency amounts based on what we feel like we need for this bond.
I appreciate the time. I've got like 7 more, but I want to respect the rest of the room.
We did have another question come in from our viewers. If a bond isn't called or doesn't pass, how would that impact the district moving forward?
So as Shannon discussed, our school district has two opportunities to bring in resources to meet the needs of our schools. Our maintenance and operations budget is the one that supplies our amazing employees, materials of instruction, and that's the budget we bring to our school board every year, and we get a lot of public input in. And then our INS that comes from funding through bonds is what covers capital needs. And so the discussion tonight are those capital needs that would potentially be met if the board calls for a bond election and if the great community of Montgomery decides to move our bond forward. If the board were to not, for any number of reasons, choose not to call for an election, or boy, I mean, how to say it, but if the community were not to see fit at this time to support a bond, then all of the needs that are discussed tonight that our committee has spent months looking over, they don't go away. We just have to then take the available budget that we have, which is our M&O budget, and take those priorities and try to put them in the queue of all the other things that are important. And as Jim said, I spent a little time in the private sector as well as the public sector, and so you have to do the best you can with what you have. And so we have to look at how do we staff our schools with amazing employees and teachers, and we put a lot of focus over the last year around increasing compensation because we have great teachers and employees. We don't want to lose them, and so I'm really proud of the work that we've done with our school board to enhance our teacher compensation, employee compensation. That has to continue. Every time we get more students, we have to hire more teachers and more employees. And that's not necessarily only a Montgomery desire to keep class sizes small, but there are mandatory class size requirements by the state. And so those have to be honored. And so as students come in, I was at Madeley Ranch today. They're enrolling 9 more students just this week. And so as those students come, we have to make sure we're addressing those needs. I'll come back to Madeley Ranch. Madeley Ranch is particularly interesting because just like in your home, and Shannon did a great job of explaining how you have home needs, and school district is much like that. So roofs have to be replaced. HVAC systems have a life cycle. They have to be replaced. We had a chiller go out at Madeley Ranch. That's over $350,000 that we had to take out of the operating budget. So when you think, what could you do with $350,000 in terms of hiring teachers or putting cool new programs into our schools, those are all the things that we're just going to have to work our way through. If for whatever reason a bond does not occur, then we'll do what we've done since I first arrived. I'm directed by our board as their focus is we will go out to the community. We'll be very transparent with all of the challenges, all of the competing needs. We'll put forward the best recommendation of priorities and the best recommendation of use of those dollars to those priorities. And we will do the very best we can with what we have. We will still have school. School will still open. It will have some challenges, but quite frankly, there's not a day that goes by where there aren't some challenges that need to be solved. So, but the potential bond does allow us to come up with a lot of answers to some of the many challenges that were shared tonight.
And just to put a little perspective, once again, remember, our total M&O budget on an annual basis is about $80 million. 80% of that goes to salaries for staff to support the students that are here, okay? So there is very little left after we get through paying salaries, paying utilities, and paying all of the other operating costs to address needs like this. Hence, that's why you see such a large number of $75 million for facility upgrades and things like that, okay? So it would take a very long time for us to be able to meet all of these needs through our M&O budget. Other questions? Don't be shy. Justin doesn't bite.
Hi, I was here for the last bond proposal, and we all were feeling the crunch of tight schools and overcrowding. And now with 2 different sides, we hear, oh, a bond proposal. So I just want to have answers for my friends that are not here or not listening online that think, the old side versus the new side, and oh, Lake Creek's getting an addition, so I don't feel this is a huge percentage of our representation of the district that's here. Maybe you're seeing a lot online, maybe they'll be at Lake Creek at the next meeting, but I just want to have an answer of how much is going to old side, how much is going to new side. At this gym right here, we've got holes in it, but yet we're getting batting cages covered. So can we just maybe talk about, I'm sure it's in there, but I was hoping we'd get, since it's very obvious what an addition looks like to us, it's brand new. So with us, I'm assuming quite a few are maybe from the old side over here, can you maybe give us a few more, just than 3 pictures of what the existing structures are going to be? How they're going to be improved, just so I can go out.
Yeah.
This is more just so I can kind of, take my information elsewhere, because I've already been told, oh, Lake Creek's getting, so I don't want to, that's why I'm here. I don't want to just vote no or yes without the information. So that's kind of what
Well,
I'd
we
like to
appreciate the
Yeah,
question. We appreciate you being
absolutely.
here, and it's an amazing question and something we grappled with the entire time. First of all, it was important that our bond task force be very representative of our Bears and our Alliance. And so every school had parents, every school had employees, every school had folks that could speak to the need to make sure that, whether you call it old or new, Lions or Bears, we want to have a standard for all of our schools and make sure that all of the standards are met. And when we talk about wanting to be the premier school district in the state of Texas, that premier is not only the amazing teaching going on in the classrooms, that we have classrooms and schools worthy of our students and our teachers. So when you look at the priorities that the task force came up with, they came in 3 buckets: growth, facility upgrades, and then also programmatic opportunities. Growth is growth, and you have to build new facilities or additions where the fastest growth is coming. And so that's why you will see an addition to Lake Creek High School. Now, what's interesting is when Lake Creek High School was first built, it was not built at the same size as Montgomery. And so there was always the idea phase 1 would we build it for 1,600, and then we would come back to bring it up to the 2,800 that Montgomery High School could serve. So really, the addition to Lake Creek not only meets the fast growth in that area, it brings comparability in size to the 2 high schools. The elementary school, 7, would relieve overcrowding in a newer school, Keenan, and I wouldn't call it older school, but on the old side of Stewart Creek. And so I think it meets both those needs. I would really draw people's attention, and I cannot tell you why I keep saying thank you to this committee so much. Having been through several bonds, it's sometimes hard to get committees to get excited about facility upgrades because it's not the sexy part of a bond. As a matter of fact, most of that, you'll never see it, but you feel it. If you're a teacher trying to teach in extreme heat, or if you are trying to serve your children nutritious meals in an aged kitchen, or if they are trafficking a gym that is really, really cold, or as we've said, outdated technology. When you look at those facility upgrades, the vast majority of those facility upgrades will serve schools that are in the Montgomery feeder pattern. Matter of fact, I think the single largest number for facility upgrades will go to Montgomery High School, with I think one of the next Montgomery Junior High. And so, again, that need is for not growth, but for facilities. As your facilities get older, they're still amazing, but they stay amazing by taking care of them. And then the programmatic opportunities are really, CTE is our opportunity to serve Bears and Lions. We are really proud that about 64% of our students leave our schools and go on to higher education. And our goal in our strategic plan is that they go first day of college ready to take credit-bearing courses. That's really important. That's our focus. But then we look and we say, but 64%, which is the highest in our region of any of our Montgomery County schools, but that means 36% are not immediately going to college. And how can we serve them better? And our CTE programs will allow them to explore careers, to get training, to get certifications, where they will be able to walk right into the world of work and get a good paying job because of the experience that we can provide them in a CTE facility. So that helps our Bears and our Lions. And so one other area of that proposed bond is around comparability. And really that is to look and say, what are those standards, and how do we make sure that if Lake Creek has it, Montgomery has it as well. If Oak Hills has it, Montgomery Junior High has it as well. If Keenan has it, then does Montgomery Elementary School have it? And so, matter of fact, we were spending time today doing one more examination. And so looking at the band hallways, looking at facilities here with lighting, looking at different programs and areas of this school to make sure that it meets that standard that we can be very proud of. So that money for comparability will be mostly skewed, I would say almost entirely skewed to our older schools.
We have another question that came in on safety and security. Is there money set aside for salaries for additional police staff and school campus officers for the new elementary and other facilities?
In the bond, I'm assuming.
Correct.
Yeah. So that is always a question that we get, and it was so eloquently talked about by Shannon. There is always this perception that we're going to come and tell you we're asking for $326.9 million, and the first thing that we're going to go do with it is give our teachers pay raises, and we're going to go hire a bunch of people. On that slide that we showed earlier tonight, we cannot use INS money. We cannot use this $326.9 million that we're going to ask you for positions or for salaries. Okay? We will continue to repeat that from now until May 7th, should this board decide to move forward with an election, okay? Because that is always a common misperception. We will not give pay raises with this $326.9 million. We will not create positions with this $326.9 million, okay? That answer will not change. If you ask it again tomorrow, 2 months from now, it's the same answer, okay?
However, you might say, well, but that school's going to need police officers, and it's going to need administrators, and it's going to need cafeteria, and so that's what comes out of the operating budget. Our board was very clear as this bond task force was created, and we said over and over again, and I think if there's one area where we've tried to be equally thoughtful in terms of lessons learned is as we've looked at the capital expenditures that this bond would bring forward, we've also looked at the operating costs. And so as we shared data with the bond task force, we looked at what would be the impact on the operating budget to opening a brand new elementary school 7. What would be the operational impacts of a CTE center? And part of the recommendations, for example, of having a centralized CTE center or a centralized ag science center is it actually can find efficiencies and decrease costs. So we will account for operational costs in our operating budget, but those operational costs do not come under or from the capital budget. So you all have been amazing, both those of you here in person and online, and I want to be super respectful of your time. And so myself and Mr. Lynn will stick around to answer any questions that you may have. I want to introduce you to a couple of other staff members. We do have Ms. Amy Vance, our Director of CTE. Amy, you want to wave your hand? We have Mr. Joe Kennard, who is our Executive Director of Operations. Joe, please raise your hand. We have several of our leaders around instruction and curriculum. We have Dr. Mark Weatherly, our Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction. We have Ms. Carrie Fitzpatrick, our Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education. Mr. Dwayne McFadden, our Assistant Secondary Superintendent. And we also have our two board members, Ms. Borton and Ms. Turner. We're all, Coach Hurd is back there as well. Coach Hurd, our Athletic Director. Sorry, Coach, I did not see you back there. You snuck in after fact. Appreciate you being here. So we're stick around to answer any questions you have. I'll just leave you with a couple of final informational items. If you leave this meeting today and say the district has moved forward and made a decision with a bond, that would actually not be accurate. What we've done is to present some amazing recommendations from a wonderful task force who have been true servant leaders. We truly appreciate what they have done over the last several months. But they have made their presentation to our school board, and our school board is taking these opportunities to listen to our public, and they will make a decision at their February 15th board meeting about whether or not to call for an election, and if they do so, that election would be this May. What I will say, again, to the question, I think the very first question, are these all of the needs of the district? They are an amazing amount of the needs of the district as we see them today and what we see in the foreseeable future. We are also not only looking at those capital needs, but also operational impacts as well. Whether we move forward with a bond, we are also creating a capital plan. And so just like we created our strategic plan last year, there will be a capital improvement plan so our community can look at over the next several years what are the replacement cycles, what are the capital needs, and they're in a prioritized list so there's total transparency as we try to articulate needs to a growing school district. All of the information that was shared tonight, if you are interested, it can be found on our website, either directly under our bond icon or also Justin Moreno is our Executive Director of Communications. Justin, where can they find any of the rest of this?
Transparency.
There's an icon that says transparency. So it's very important that the information not only gets shared with our board, but is available for our community to weigh in as well. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today, either in person or online. We will stick around, and we so appreciate your involvement tonight, your support of our school district. Exciting things are ahead for Montgomery ISD. So thank you very much.